This is a rare Ethiopian Orthodox Bible manuscript, handwritten in Ethiopia's sacred liturgical language. What if the most important words ever spoken by Jesus Christ were never written in the Bible? You know, not lost, not destroyed, hidden. For nearly 2,000 years, the story ends the same way. The tomb is empty, the stone is rolled away, and then silence. No details, no final message, just a gap where answers should be. But what if that silence wasn't accidental? What if it was intentional? High in the mountains of Ethiopia, inside ancient monasteries carved into stone and sealed off from the world, a different version of events has been preserved, not rewritten, protected, passed down in whispers, guarded by monks who believed these words were never meant for the outside world. And just before his death, one of those monks broke that silence. With no cameras, no recordings, and no audience beyond a single student, he revealed something that had been kept secret for generations. What Jesus Christ actually said after the resurrection, words spoken during the mysterious 40 days history barely explains. Words so direct, so unsettling, they were locked away inside an ancient 81-book scripture few have ever seen. This isn't legend. This isn't speculation. This is something that was deliberately kept hidden. Before we reveal what the monk confessed in his final moments, hit like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear was never meant for the public. And to understand what that monk was protecting, you first need to understand just how different the Ethiopian Bible actually is. Most people grow up believing the Bible is fixed, final, and untouchable, as if it fell from the sky in its current form. But the Ethiopian Orthodox Church never agreed with that version of history, and they have the receipts to prove it. While the Western Bible was standardized at 66 books, Ethiopia preserved 81 books like Enoch, Jubilees, and Maccabees. Texts that were used by early Christians revered by ancient Jewish communities and then quietly dropped from the Western canon. For centuries, Western scholars dismissed them as myths, forgeries, or dangerous distractions. Then science stepped in. Radiocarbon dating of the Germa Gospels discovered inside an Ethiopian monastery confirmed they were written between 330 and 650 AD, making them the oldest illustrated Christian manuscripts ever found on Earth. While Europe was burning through the Dark Ages, Ethiopian monks were preserving Christianity's original source code, untouched, unedited, and unapproved by Rome. And what's inside those extra books is not gentle Sunday morning reading. The Book of Enoch doesn't just say humanity sinned before the flood. It explains why. It describes a cosmic breach. 200 watcher angels who descended to Earth, took human wives, and produced hybrid beings called the Nephilim, giants who consumed the world's resources and unleashed chaos on civilization. The book names Samyaza, Azil, Barakiel. It says, these beings taught forbidden knowledge to humans, weapon, seduction, astrology, things that were never meant to be revealed. This wasn't simple disobedience. It was an unauthorized transfer of power. That's exactly why Rome rejected it. The world Enoch describes is chaotic, untamable, and impossible to control through institutional religion. So, it was removed. Ethiopia kept it. And Enoch, as explosive as it is, was just the opening act. Because the real shock, the thing that monk was whispering about on his deathbed, is a text called the Mashafa Kedan, the Book of the Covenant, Ahants, and what's written inside it rewrites everything you thought you knew about the resurrection. What Jesus said during the 40 days in the standard Gospel of Luke, the period between the resurrection and the ascension, is handled in a few brief verses. Jesus appears, blesses the disciples, and rises into the sky. 40 days condensed into a paragraph. But in the Ethiopian Mashafan, those 40 days are the main event. According to this text, the risen Christ doesn't just comfort his disciples. He gathers them with urgency, like a general giving a final briefing before leaving a battlefield. and he begins to teach them things that were never recorded in any Western gospel. He starts with a warning about the material world. He calls it the playground of a deceptive force, a builder of shadows, an entity that uses wealth, status, and power to keep human beings spiritually blind. And then he says something that should have been the most famous line in all of Christian history. Do not build temples of stone, for the stone will crumble. Build the temple of the heart, for it is eternal. In the context of this text, that is not a metaphor. It is a direct command. He is warning them explicitly against organized religion. He predicts that men will wear long robes and invoke his name to accumulate gold. He warns against a future empire that will take his cross and turn it into a sword. The specificity of it is what unsettles scholars most. It reads as if he is standing 2,000 years in the future, watching the Crusades unfold, watching the Inquisitions, watching televangelists fill arenas while the poor go hungry outside. He tells them plainly, the true believer must be a stranger to the systems of men. But the warning doesn't stop there. He introduces something that sounds almost scientific in the way it describes the human soul. He says, every human being has two winds moving through them simultaneously, the wind of life and the wind of error. And the wind of error, he explains, isn't simply bad intentions or sinful thoughts. He describes it like a parasite with specific entry points. It enters through greed. It enters through the eyes when they look at what they shouldn't. It enters through the mouth when it speaks deception. And once it takes hold, it doesn't just make you worse. It calcifies the heart. It turns a living, breathing human being into what he calls directly a walking tomb. Think about that phrase for a moment. A walking tomb. A person who eats, sleeps, works, scrolls through their phone, but whose inner life has already gone cold. A spiritual zombie. He wasn't describing fiction. He was describing a condition he believed was already spreading. And then he gives them the antidote. Not a sacrament, not a ritual, not a financial offering to a temple. He calls it gnosis, knowledge, direct internal personal knowledge of truth. He teaches them to observe their own thoughts the way a guard observes a city gate, watching what enters and what exits. And then he says the line that would have dismantled the entire structure of institutional religion if it had been widely published. He says the kingdom of heaven is literally inside the human body, hidden in the silence between thoughts. This is why that text had to be suppressed. If the average person in the Roman Empire believed that God lived inside them, they would stop paying taxes to the temple. They would stop fearing the bishop. They would stop needing an institution as their intermediary with the divine. They would become, in the language of empire, completely uncontrollable. But Jesus didn't stop at spiritual instruction. He also said things that centuries later, modern science would quietly confirm. Science hiding in ancient text. The Book of the Covenant contains cosmological details that were, for most of history, dismissed as poetic nonsense. He speaks of the storehouses of snow and the gates of the winds, describing weather as something that moves through structured channels and follows invisible pathways across the planet. For centuries, this sounded like mythology. Modern meteorology now confirms that global weather patterns travel in defined atmospheric rivers, literal rivers of wind circling the Earth at high altitudes. How does a 2,000-year-old text reference the atmospheric dynamics of the planet? He also speaks of a great abyss of water hidden beneath the Earth's surface, again, dismissed as symbolism. Until when scientists announced the discovery of a massive reservoir of water, locked inside ringwoodite rock, deep within the Earth's mantle, holding more water than all of the planet's surface oceans combined. The abyss was real. The Ethiopian Bible was right. And if these texts were accurate about the water beneath us and the rivers of wind above us, the question that logically follows is impossible to ignore. What else were they right about? He also left the disciples something more than words. According to the Mashafakan, He shared a specific practice, a secret discipline known only to those in the inner circle, involving the deliberate control of breath and the focused direction of thought. It reads almost identically to advanced contemplative practices documented across India, Tibet, and the Eastern traditions. This connects to one of the most persistent theories in biblical archaeology, that Jesus spent his so-called lost years, the gap between age 12 and 30, that the Gospels never explain, studying in the monasteries of India or the learning centers of Tibet. The teachings recorded in the Ethiopian Bible are strikingly Eastern concepts that resemble karma, reincarnation, inner energy centers, all present, all framed in the ancient language of the text. And then he says, the line that ties everything together, the line that monks have been memorizing and protecting for 2,000 years. He looks at his disciples and tells them, the darkness will come, and it will wear my face. It will wear my face. He is not warning them about an obvious monster. He is warning them about a deception so sophisticated that it would look exactly like him. It would speak his name, carry his cross, build cathedrals in his honor, and be the precise instrument of the spiritual destruction he spent his life opposing. The Antichrist in this text doesn't arrive as a villain. It arrives as a savior. And the Ethiopian monks who guarded this passage believed with absolute conviction that it was not a future prophecy. It was a description of something already in motion. And the proof that Ethiopia took all of this seriously isn't just found in manuscripts. It's carved into the landscape itself. The Ark of the Covenant. You cannot tell this story without addressing the single most powerful object in biblical history and Ethiopia's very specific claim to it. While Hollywood placed the Ark of the Covenant in a government warehouse in New Mexico, Ethiopia has maintained for 3,000 years, without wavering, that the Ark is here, locked inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, in the ancient city of Axum. And this isn't casual cultural folklore. This claim is the central pillar of Ethiopian civilization. The story begins with the Queen of Sheba. She travels to Jerusalem, meets King Solomon, and returns to Ethiopia carrying his son, Menelik I. Years later, a grown Menelik visits his father. Solomon offers him the throne of Israel. Menelik refuses, but he doesn't leave empty-handed. According to the Crust, Ethiopia's royal chronicle, Menelik and his companions executed what may be history's greatest heist, replacing the Ark in the Holy of Holies with a replica and quietly carrying the original back to Africa. The biblical descriptions of the Ark are not those of a decorative religious object. They describe something that incinerated armies, struck people dead if they touched it incorrectly, and released fire that couldn't be naturally explained. The effects, when read in detail, sound uncomfortably close to radiation exposure, which is why what happens to the Ark's guardian today is so difficult to dismiss. Only one man at a time holds the role of guardian. He is chosen. He enters the chapel and he never leaves again for the rest of his life. Visitors who have observed these guardians over the years report a consistent pattern: deteriorating eyesight, cataracts, skin that pales over time, early death. These are not the symptoms of spiritual devotion. These are the symptoms of prolonged exposure to something that emits energy. If the Ark is simply a wooden box covered in gold, none of that makes any sense. And empires throughout history sense that the Knights Templar traveled to Ethiopia in the 12th century, specifically hunting for it. Their carved symbols still exist inside the stone churches of Libella. They weren't looking for a religious artifact. They were looking for a source of power. Ethiopia held firm, and Ethiopia alone among all African nations was never colonized. When Italy invaded with modern weapons in 1896, they were crushed at the Battle of Adwa. Locals speak of a light on the battlefield that turned the tide. History records it as a military miracle. Ethiopians remember it differently. And nowhere does Ethiopia's ancient power become more physically undeniable than in the churches of Laabela. The churches of Laabela. In the 12th century, King Laibela didn't commission the construction of 11 churches. He commissioned their excavation. Because these churches weren't built up from the ground, they were carved down into solid volcanic rock. Entire cathedrals with windows, doors, columns, interior chambers, and sophisticated drainage systems, all cut from a single continuous piece of stone. This is not a technique that forgives mistakes. You cannot undo a wrong cut. You cannot patch a cracked column. Every decision has to be correct the first time, which means the entire three-dimensional structure of each church had to be perfectly visualized before a single chisel made contact with the rock. Modern structural engineers have studied these buildings and reached a deeply uncomfortable conclusion. To carve all 11 churches using period-appropriate hand tools would require approximately 40,000 skilled workers and well over a century of continuous labor. The project is attributed to a 24-year window. And there is another problem: the millions of tons of volcanic rock that were removed during excavation. It simply isn't there. No debris field, no quarry dump, no evidence of where it went. The monks have always had an explanation. Human workers carved during the day. At night, angels descended and continued the work, moving twice as fast, using what the ancient accounts describe as tools of light that passed through solid rock without friction. Tools of light. In 2024, we would call that directed energy, laser technology. The idea is no longer as absurd as it once seemed. Some researchers propose that the Ark of the Covenant, which Ethiopian tradition places in active use during this period, may have served as the power source. Accounts from other ancient cultures, including those of Mesoamerica and Egypt, reference methods of softening stone using acoustic frequencies or specific chemical processes. If such technology existed in Ethiopia, it would explain Laibela completely. The most famous of the 11 churches is the Church of St. George. It is shaped as a perfect cross carved straight down into the earth, until the roof sits at ground level. You stand above it and look down into it. The geometry is flawless. The drainage system carved into its base has kept the interior dry through 800 years of seasonal flooding. That engineering alone would be remarkable for a modern construction team. In the 12th century, it is almost inexplicable. Beneath the entire complex runs a network of pitch-black tunnels. Candidates for the priesthood are sent into these tunnels alone in complete darkness to navigate by touch and sound, chanting as they go. It is a sensory deprivation ritual built from stone, the theology of the Book of the Covenant running through the architecture. You must walk through the darkness before you earn the light. Recently, 3D laser scans of the site revealed hollow chambers beneath the floors that have not been opened in 8 centuries. The priests say these spaces contain the treasury of the saints, gold manuscripts, perhaps the tools used in the original construction. No one has been permitted to open them. King Laibela spent time in Jerusalem before the city fell to siege. His vision was to build a new Jerusalem in Africa, beyond the reach of conquest, beyond the politics of empire. He named the river running through the town the River Jordan. He carved the Star of David, the Christian cross, and the ancient solar swastika, a symbol of the sun that predates Nazi corruption by thousands of years, all into the same walls. He was building a fusion, a preservation of everything sacred from every direction, encoded in stone that would last forever. While European cathedrals were bombed flat during the World Wars, Laibela stood untouched. It still stands today. But Laibela, the Ark, the 81 books, they all point back to one thing: a bloodline, the hidden bloodline in Western Christianity. Jesus stands alone, no descendants, no continuing family line. The story ends at the cross and picks back up in heaven. But in Ethiopia, that idea is culturally incomprehensible. Family is not peripheral to identity. Family is identity. Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty ruled for nearly 3,000 years, from approximately 900 BC until 1974 SPFO, one unbroken royal lineage. The last emperor, Haile Selassie, was the 225th ruler in that chain, officially titled the Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah. That is not a poetic honorific. It is a legal, genealogical, and theological claim, a direct line to King David himself. Follow that lineage carefully, and it doesn't just connect Ethiopia to the Old Testament. It creates a genealogical overlap with the New Testament that mainstream Western theology has no comfortable way to address. If Mary, the mother of Jesus, belonged to the house of David and Ethiopia's royal dynasty traced the same bloodline for millennia, then the connection between Ethiopia and Christ wasn't theological. It was familial, literal family. This is why Rastafarianism, born in the early 20th century, identified Haile Selassie as the returned Messiah. The Book of Revelation describes the returning lion of the tribe of Judah. Selassie bore that exact title. He never claimed divinity himself, but he understood with complete clarity what that ancestry meant. Then modern genetics entered the conversation. DNA studies of Ethiopian populations have identified ancient genetic markers from the Levant, specifically from the region of modern Israel and Syria, dating back approximately 3,000 years. A real migration. Real people who actually moved from Jerusalem into Ethiopia, not in legend, but in biology. The oral traditions turned out to be genetic history. This also explains why Ethiopian Christianity looks so fundamentally different from its Western counterpart. The Saturday Sabbath kept, circumcision on the 8th day kept, detailed dietary laws kept. The Ethiopian Church didn't adopt Jewish practice. It never abandoned it because it was never entirely separate from it, which makes the most radical idea in this entire story suddenly uncomfortably worth considering. If Jesus survived the crucifixion, which certain ancient texts quietly suggest, and if he needed to disappear to somewhere completely safe, where better than a kingdom ruled by his own extended bloodline, a nation that had already proven it would guard sacred things with its life. In the remote highlands of Ethiopia, oral traditions passed down through generations speak of a mysterious teacher who arrived from the north, a healer, a man of extraordinary peace who spoke in a way that people had never heard before. They do not call him Jesus. They call him the righteous teacher. And no one in all the centuries since has been able to explain who he was. As the monks of Ethiopia say, the West has the water, we have the well. And now, after 2,000 years of silence, the well is finally being opened. Why now? Let's start with a question. Most people don't stop to ask, why now? Why are these ancient texts suddenly appearing everywhere after staying hidden for nearly 2,000 years? For centuries, these writings were not public. They were kept deep inside mountain monasteries in Ethiopia, carefully wrapped, protected, and watched over by monks who had dedicated their entire lives to guarding them. These weren't just old books sitting on a shelf. The monks believed they were protecting something sacred, something that was never meant to be released too early. Through wars, invasions, political changes, and the rise and fall of empires, these texts survived, not because of luck, but because people made sure they did. The monks didn't see themselves as librarians. They saw themselves as guardians of a secret. And then suddenly, things changed. In just the past few years, these hidden writings started to appear online. Translations, some official, some not, began spreading across the internet. Videos started popping up. Discussions began. Millions of people who had never even heard of these texts are now learning about them while scrolling through social media. You might even be discovering them right now. That kind of sudden exposure doesn't feel random. Some people believe there's a deeper reason behind it. One of the most mysterious texts connected to this is called the Mashafa Kedan. According to its descriptions, the end times wouldn't look like fire falling from the sky or sudden destruction. Instead, it describes something much more subtle and honestly much more familiar. It talks about a world filled with illusions. In its original language, it describes a time when people are deeply connected yet disconnected at the same time. A world where communication happens without voices and people see things without using their physical eyes. A world full of signals but lacking truth. If you think about it, that sounds a lot like today. The internet, social media, artificial intelligence, constant information, but not always clarity. Because of this, some believe the monks weren't just preserving history, they were protecting something meant for a specific moment in time. A kind of guide or warning meant to be released when humanity reached a certain point. And maybe that point is now. The idea is simple but powerful. When people become lost in confusion, distractions, and false realities, the truth needs to be revealed to help them find their way again. Look around at the world today. Trust in governments is low. Trust in media is fading. Even faith in organized religion is declining in many places. People aren't just looking for answers. They're searching for something real, something direct, something that doesn't feel filtered or controlled. And that's exactly what these ancient texts seem to offer. They don't just tell stories. They present a different way of understanding human beings and their connection to the divine. To understand this better, we need to look at an important moment in history, the Council of Nika. This was a gathering where early church leaders came together to decide which texts would become part of the official Bible. The goal was to create a clear and unified version of Scripture for the wider world. But according to some interpretations, something else may have happened. Certain books were left out. And those books, according to this perspective, contained ideas that were very different from what became mainstream. They described humans not as weak or dependent, but as spiritually powerful, capable of directly connecting with God without needing an intermediary. In other words, they suggested that the truth didn't have to come through an institution. By removing those texts, some believe the system became more controlled. The message became simpler, but also more limited. However, Ethiopia never fully followed those changes. The Ethiopian Bible still includes many of these additional books, keeping a version of Scripture that is much larger and in some ways very different from the versions most people know. And here's where things get even more interesting. Some parts of these ancient writings don't sound like traditional religious teachings at all. Instead, they describe ideas that feel surprisingly close to modern science. For example, there are passages that seem to describe the movement of objects using sound, what we might today call acoustic levitation. This is the idea that sound waves, when used in a precise way, can actually move physical matter. Now think about the incredible rock-hewn churches of La Abella. Massive structures carved directly out of solid stone. Their construction has always been surrounded by mystery. Traditional stories say they were built with the help of angels. But if you replace the word angels with advanced technology, suddenly the story takes on completely different meaning. Could it be symbolic? Could it be misunderstood knowledge? Or could it be something that was once known, then lost, and is now being rediscovered? Some researchers believe these texts may contain fragments of an ancient science, knowledge that existed long before modern civilization and was deliberately hidden or forgotten. If that's true, then this isn't just about religion. It's about history, knowledge, and the possibility that humanity once understood far more than we do today. So here's the question that really matters. If powerful institutions in the past shaped what information people could access, what else might still be hidden? And if a monk, after spending his entire life protecting a secret, decided to finally share it just before he died, what does that say about how important or urgent that truth might be? Maybe he believed the time for silence was over. Maybe he believed people needed to hear it now. Because whether you see these texts as spiritual, historical, or symbolic, one thing is clear: they are no longer hidden. The seal in many ways has been broken. Now the responsibility shifts to us to read, to question, and to decide what we believe. And maybe the real question isn't just why now. Maybe the real question is, are we ready to understand what's being revealed? If this made you think in a new way, hit like and subscribe because there's much more to uncover. And what comes next goes even deeper.